That flagpole is a violation of federal law, Colonel, and I will have it torn down even if I have to sue the Marines myself." The words, delivered with the shrill certainty of someone who had never been truly challenged, hung in the humid afternoon air, thick and offensive. Karen Henderson, the self-appointed queen of Oak Creek Meadows and president of our homeowners association, stood on the pristine edge of my newly sodded lawn, her plus-size frame straining the seams of a violently floral muumuu. Her arms were crossed so tightly over her chest that her fists, clutching a clipboard like a scepter, were turning a blotchy white. Her face, a mask of indignant fury, was framed by a helmet of peroxide blonde hair that hadn't moved a millimeter in the breeze. Behind me, the American flag, the whole reason for this ludicrous confrontation, snapped smartly in the wind. The metallic clink of the halyard against the gleaming aluminum pole, a crisp, defiant rhythm. It was the only sound for a moment, a percussive counterpoint to the vein throbbing in Karen's temple. I had been retired from the Marine Corps for 6 months, and in that time I'd faced down contractors who tried to cut corners on my roof and a dealership that tried to sell me a lemon. This, however, was a new kind of enemy. She wasn't motivated by profit or laziness. She was motivated by a pure, unadulterated lust for petty power, the most dangerous and irrational force in the suburban wild. My wife, Sarah, put a gentle hand on my arm, a silent plea for the calm, measured man she knew, not the colonel I used to be. I gave her a subtle nod, my eyes never leaving Karen's. "First," I said, my voice level, betraying none of the cold anger coiling in my gut, "the freedom to display the American Flag Act of 2005, a federal law, explicitly prevents any HOA from restricting the display of the U.S. flag. Second, you cannot sue the Marine Corps. They have more lawyers than you have ridiculous bylaws, and frankly, better things to do." Karen's face went from pink to a startling shade of magenta. "Don't you quote laws at me. This isn't about the flag, it's about the pole. It's an unapproved structural addition. It's a visual nuisance. It exceeds the height restrictions for ancillary structures." She jabbed a sausage-like finger at her clipboard. "I have it all right here. Article 7, Section 4, Paragraph B. You are in violation. You have 48 hours to remove it or the fines will begin. $50 a day, compounding." She smiled then, a tight, vicious little smirk that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator that knows it has its prey cornered, a smile that said she enjoyed this, that my frustration was her nourishment. The flagpole wasn't just a pole to me. It was a memorial, a promise I had made to a young sergeant who didn't come home from Helmand Province. His name was Daniel Miller, and the last conversation I ever had with him was about how much he missed seeing the flag fly over his dad's porch back home. Seeing it on my lawn every morning was my private tribute, a quiet acknowledgement of a debt that could never be fully repaid. And this woman, this tyrant of trimmed hedges and approved beige paint palettes, was threatening to tear it down because it offended her sense of order. The battle lines weren't just drawn on my lawn, they were etched deep in my soul. She had picked a fight over a symbol, but she had no idea what that symbol truly represented, or what I was capable of when defending it. If you think that's an insane level of entitlement, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. And while you're at it, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from or if you've got your own HOA nightmare story to share. You're not going to want to miss how this ends because Karen's little threat wasn't the end of a confrontation. It was the beginning of a war she had no possible way of winning. To understand why a 20-foot flagpole could ignite such a fire, you need to understand where I came from. My name is Mark Bishop. For 30 years, I was an officer in the United States Marine Corps, retiring as a full colonel. My specialty wasn't infantry or aviation, it was logistics and acquisition. I didn't just command troops. I built supply chains that stretched across continents, negotiated multi-billion-dollar contracts for next-generation equipment, and conducted hostile takeovers of failing defense contractors to absorb their assets into more competent hands. My entire career was about understanding complex systems, identifying their weaknesses, and then leveraging those weaknesses to achieve a strategic objective. I was, for lack of a better term, a corporate raider in a uniform fighting for the taxpayer instead of a stock price. When I retired, all I wanted was peace. Sarah and I bought our house in Oak Creek Meadows precisely because it seemed like the epitome of quiet suburbia. Manicured lawns, kids riding bikes, a community pool. It was the American dream we'd been defending from thousands of miles away for 3 decades. We wanted a place where the loudest sound was a lawnmower on a Saturday morning, not a C-130 taking off. For the first few months, it was exactly that. We met the neighbors, we planted a garden, and I started drawing up plans for my workshop in the garage. The first sign of trouble was a crisp, cream-colored envelope in our mailbox. It was from the HOA, a welcome packet. Tucked inside was a 3-ring binder 2 inches thick, filled with the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and Rs. It was denser than a DoD procurement manual. I chuckled at the time, telling Sarah it looked like more regulations than the UCMJ. I had no idea how right I was. The first official notice came a week later. Our mailbox, the one that came with the house, was apparently half an inch too low, according to Article 9, Section 2. A friendly warning. I adjusted it. The next week, another notice. The azaleas Sarah had planted were not on the pre-approved list of shrubbery. We were instructed to replace them with something from the list, like a nice uniform boxwood. This time I felt a flicker of annoyance. We ignored it. That's when we first met Karen in person. She didn't knock. She materialized on our porch one afternoon while I was on a ladder cleaning the gutters, her clipboard already in hand. She introduced herself as the HOA president and immediately launched into a lecture about the unapproved flora and the importance of maintaining a harmonious community aesthetic. She spoke with a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge, the kind of tone one uses with a particularly slow child. That was the day I realized the HOA wasn't a benevolent neighborhood association. It was a fiefdom, and we had just moved into the shadow of the castle. The flagpole was the culmination of this slow burn insanity. After months of planning and getting the proper city permits, which superseded any HOA bylaw, a fact I was well aware of, I had it professionally installed. It was a beautiful commercial-grade pole set in a deep concrete base. The day the flag went up for the first time, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a connection to my past, to the men and women I served with, and especially to Sergeant Miller. It was a sacred space on my own property. Karen saw it differently. She saw it as an act of rebellion, a direct challenge to her authority. She couldn't have known that my entire life had been about facing down bullies and dismantling dysfunctional systems. She thought she was dealing with just another homeowner she could intimidate with fines and nasty letters. She was about to find out she had declared war on a man who had forgotten more about strategy and attrition than she would ever know. And I would fight this war not with anger, but with precision, patience, and a deep, abiding understanding of the system she held so dear. The fines began arriving exactly 48 hours and 1 minute after Karen's ultimatum, delivered with the grim punctuality of a metronome. Each one was a separate invoice, tucked inside a windowed envelope from the Oak Creek Meadows HOA accounting department, which I suspected was just Karen's dining room table. $50 for day 1, $105 for day 2, the original $50 plus a new $50 fine, plus a 10% late fee on the first day's fine. It was creative, I had to give her that. The math was predatory, designed to spiral out of control and panic the average homeowner into submission. I, however, was not the average homeowner. For every single notice she sent me via certified mail requiring my signature, I sent one back. I didn't just scribble "disputed" on her invoices. I drafted formal letters printed on my own letterhead, complete with a case number I assigned myself, OCM-FB-001, Oak Creek Meadows-Flagpole Battle-001. Each letter was a master class in bureaucratic warfare. I cited the full text of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. I included a copy of my city-issued permit for the flagpole's installation, highlighting the section that stated it was in full compliance with municipal codes. I then methodically deconstructed her claim from the CC and Rs, arguing that a flagpole did not meet the definition of an ancillary structure like a shed or a gazebo, and that even if it did, the federal law took precedence under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. I sent each of my responses via certified mail, return receipt requested, creating my own paper trail of evidence. The mailman, a weary-looking guy named Tom, started giving me a knowing, sympathetic look. "Her again, huh, Colonel?" he'd ask, handing me another of Karen's venomous dispatches. "Her again, Tom," I'd reply, handing him my meticulously prepared countersalvo. This paper war went on for 2 weeks. The stack of her fines on my desk grew, as did the stack of my registered mail receipts. Karen, realizing her paper tigers weren't scaring me, decided to escalate to psychological warfare. She started targeting Sarah. When my wife would be out gardening, Karen would walk her yapping little dog along the property line, making loud, pointed comments to the dog about some people having no respect for the rules. She would stand there, ostensibly letting her dog do its business, and just stare at our house, at Sarah, for uncomfortable lengths of time. It was classic intimidation, meant to unnerve and isolate. Then she turned her attention to the neighbors. I started noticing people averting their eyes when I'd wave on my morning run. One evening, the Millers from next door, a young couple with 2 small kids, caught me by the fence. "Mark, we're with you. We really are, mister," Miller said, his voice a low whisper. "But Karen cornered my wife at the pool. Said if we were seen being too friendly with you, she'd have to re-inspect our fence for compliance. She fined us $200 last month because our son's basketball hoop was visible from the street for 3 hours on a Tuesday. It's just they were terrified. She was using the entire community as a weapon, fostering an environment of fear where neighbor was afraid to even speak to neighbor lest they end up in the crosshairs." The absolute peak of her hubris came the following Saturday. She convened a special emergency hearing of the Architectural Review Committee on her own front porch. The committee consisted of herself and 2 elderly sycophants who nodded along to her every word. It was a public spectacle. She'd invited half a dozen neighbors to observe the proceedings, positioning them in lawn chairs on her driveway. From my own porch, I watched as she held up photos of my flagpole, her voice carrying across the lawns. She spoke of blatant disregard, willful defiance, and the erosion of our community standards. She was putting me on trial in absentia, a show trial, for the benefit of her terrified subjects. It was a calculated act of public humiliation. She was trying to paint me as the villain, the rogue element disrupting her suburban utopia. As I stood there, watching her preen and posture, I felt the cold anger in my gut solidify into something else: resolve. This was no longer about a flagpole. It was about a bully who had taken a simple administrative role and twisted it into an instrument of personal power and torment. She had created a system of control based on fear, and the only way to beat a system like that is not to fight it on its own terms, but to dismantle it from the inside out. Her porchside tribunal wasn't just an insult, it was a fatal miscalculation. It showed me she believed her power was absolute. And absolute power, as I knew from decades of studying failed states and broken commands, is a precursor to a spectacular fall. The final straw wasn't a letter or a public denouncement. It was the low, guttural rumble of a diesel engine and the rhythmic, ominous beep, beep, beep of a vehicle in reverse. I was in my garage, sketching out the final plans for my workshop, when the sound cut through the quiet morning. I walked to the end of my driveway and saw it, a massive, greasy flatbed tow truck, its hydraulic arms poised like a predator's claws backing up toward my prized 1995 Ford F-150. The truck was my baby. I'd bought it from a farmer in Virginia 20 years ago and had restored it myself, piece by piece. It was cherry red, perfectly maintained, and represented countless hours of satisfying, methodical work. The tow truck driver, a burly guy with a stained t-shirt and a weary expression, hopped out, clipboard in hand. Got an order to tow a commercial vehicle, he grunted, not making eye contact. HOA call, said it's been parked here in violation. I looked at my F-150. It was parked fully in my driveway, not touching the sidewalk. Then I saw it. On the driver's side door, barely visible, was the faded, ghosted outline of a logo from a small consulting business I'd run for a few years between active duty assignments. The vinyl lettering had been removed a decade ago, but on a sunny day, if you caught the light just right, you could still see the faint impression. That was her pretext. That was Karen's new angle. My personal classic vehicle was now a commercial vehicle, in violation of an obscure bylaw about commercial signage. This truck is registered as a personal vehicle, I said, keeping my voice steady. You can't tow it from private property without the owner's consent, which you do not have. The driver just shrugged, a cog in a machine he didn't care to understand. Lady on the phone was real insistent, said the HOA has authorization in the covenants, said she's the president and she's authorizing it. My dispatch just tells me where to go. He was about to hook up my truck. My truck. The one I'd bled on, sweated on, and poured my heart into. In that moment, something inside me went dead quiet. The anger vanished, replaced by a crystalline, surgical clarity. I walked calmly back into my garage, retrieved my wallet, and walked back out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten him. I simply stood in front of my truck and held up my driver's license and the vehicle's registration. My name is Mark Bishop, I said, my voice as flat and hard as a granite slab. I am the owner of this property and this vehicle, as you can see from this state-issued registration. The vehicle is parked legally on my private property. The person who called you, Karen Henderson, has no legal authority to order the removal of my personal property. If you attach that hook to my vehicle, I will not stop you. But I will immediately file a police report for grand theft auto, and I will file a civil suit against you and your company for damages, trespassing, and illegal seizure of property. I am a retired Marine colonel. I have considerable time and resources, and I assure you I will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. I let the silence hang there. I watched the driver's eyes flick from my face to the registration, back to my face. He saw no anger, no bluffing. He saw only a statement of fact. He let out a long, tired sigh, the air of a man who suddenly realized his $15 an hour job wasn't worth the mountain of legal trouble that was now staring him in the face. He muttered something under his breath, snatched his clipboard, and got back in his cab. He didn't even bother to pull forward, just threw the truck in gear and rumbled away, leaving behind only the smell of diesel fumes and the echo of Karen's failed power play. I stood there for a long time, watching the tow truck disappear. It wasn't a victory. It was a clarification. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She had crossed a line, attempting to seize my personal property. This was escalation beyond rules and regulations. This was personal. As I walked back to the house, her favorite threat echoed in my mind, the one she'd made in her letters and to the Millers. I'm reporting this to Prestige Property Management. They handle our enforcement. They'll sort you out. She wielded the name of this company like a cudgel, her ultimate authority, the higher power that would validate her tyranny. Prestige Property Management, her enforcers, her muscle. An idea, cold and brilliant, began to form in my mind. It was an idea born of 3 decades in military acquisition. When an enemy has a weapon you can't counter, you don't try to destroy the weapon, you take control of it. Karen thought Prestige Property Management was her sword. She had no idea I was about to buy the forge. The operation began not in a war room, but at my kitchen table with a laptop and a cup of black coffee. The target, Prestige Property Management. My mission, a complete strategic acquisition. I approached this exactly as I would have approached the analysis of a hostile foreign asset. First, reconnaissance. I spent 2 days building a comprehensive dossier. Using public records databases, I found their LLC filing with the state. Prestige Property Management, LLC, was a single owner entity. The owner's name was Arthur Finch. I cross-referenced his name and found his home address, his age, 68, and a few sparse details from local business journals. The company was founded 15 years ago. Their client list, gleaned from the public-facing websites of various HOAs in the Tri-County area, consisted of about 25 communities, mostly small to mid-size ones like Oak Creek Meadows. Their physical address was a small, rented office space in a tired-looking strip mall about 20 miles away. Next, I moved to financial analysis. This was trickier, but not impossible. I couldn't see their private books, but I could analyze the health of their clients. I pulled the public budgets for several of the HOAs they managed. I saw a pattern: stagnant management fees, contracts that hadn't been renegotiated in years, and a few HOAs that had recently switched to larger, more modern management companies. The picture that emerged was one of a company that was, at best, treading water. It was likely a legacy business, run by a man nearing the end of his career, without the energy or the modern infrastructure to compete with bigger, more aggressive firms. Arthur Finch was probably tired. He was probably overwhelmed. And a man who is tired and overwhelmed is a man who might be receptive to a clean, quiet exit strategy. The final step was to create my cover. I couldn't approach him as Mark Bishop, the disgruntled homeowner from Oak Creek Meadows. He would see it as a conflict of interest, or worse, a revenge plot, and the deal would be dead on arrival. So, I created a shell. I spent a few $100s online to legally establish MB Capital Investments, LLC, a generic, sterile name. I was no longer Mark Bishop, retired colonel. I was Mr. Bishop, the managing partner of a private investment firm looking to acquire small, stable service-based businesses in the region. I called the main number for Prestige Property Management. A harried-sounding woman answered. I asked to speak with Mr. Finch, introducing myself as Mr. Bishop from MB Capital. I was polite, professional, and intentionally vague, stating only that I was exploring acquisition opportunities and his company had come highly recommended for its long-standing community ties. I was put on hold. A few moments later, a weary, gravelly voice came on the line. Arthur Finch. We spoke for 10 minutes. I didn't push. I simply explained my firm's interest in businesses with reliable revenue streams and asked if he might be open to a preliminary confidential conversation. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The long pause before he said, I might be willing to listen. We scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday at his office. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed not in a suit, but in smart business casual, a polo shirt and slacks. I wanted to look like a serious investor, but an approachable one. The office was exactly as I had pictured it: dated furniture, beige walls, the faint smell of stale coffee and old paper. Arthur Finch was a thin, stooped man with kind eyes clouded by exhaustion. His desk was a mountain of paperwork, a physical manifestation of his stress. He offered me a cup of coffee, and we talked. For the first 30 minutes, I just listened. I asked him about the business, its history, its challenges. He unburdened himself. He talked about rising insurance costs, the difficulty in finding good help, and most tellingly, the nightmare of dealing with certain HOA boards. It's the president's insurance, he said, rubbing his temples. They get a little bit of power, and they think they're royalty. They call at all hours. They demand you do things you legally can't. They treat my staff like dirt. I've got one. This woman, Karen, over at Oak Creek, she calls 3 times a day, thinks we're her personal army, wants us to put liens on people's houses for having the wrong color flowers. It's draining the life out of me, Mr. Bishop. It was the moment I had been waiting for. The unsolicited, organic confirmation of my entire thesis. He was being crushed under the weight of his own client's pathologies. He saw me not as a threat, but as a potential savior. After he finished, I made my move. Arthur, I said, leaning forward slightly, my firm specializes in this. We acquire good companies with solid foundations but which are facing operational headwinds. We inject capital, streamline processes, and handle the administrative burdens, allowing the founder to enjoy a well-deserved retirement. I am prepared to make you a fair, all-cash offer for the entirety of Prestige Property Management, including all its assets and client contracts. We can close in less than 30 days. You walk away clean with a check in your hand." I named a number. It was a fair market price, maybe even a little generous, calculated to be too good and too easy to refuse. Arthur Finch looked at me, then at the mountain of paper on his desk, then back at me. A slow smile of pure, unadulterated relief spread across his face. "Mr. Bishop," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "where do I sign?" The war for Oak Creek Meadows had just been won in a strip mall office 20 miles away, and the enemy didn't even know the battle had begun. The transfer of ownership was executed with the quiet efficiency of a special forces operation. Lawyers were engaged, funds were wired from MB Capital's new business account, and within 3 weeks, every share and asset of Prestige Property Management, LLC, was legally mine. On the final closing documents, my signature was just an illegible scrawl above the typed name Mark Bishop, Managing Partner, MB Capital Investments. To the outside world, nothing had changed. To Arthur Finch, it was a golden parachute. To me, it was the key to the entire kingdom. My first official act as the new silent owner was to call an all-hands meeting at the office. I arrived on a Monday morning. The 3 employees, 2 account managers, and a part-time bookkeeper looked at me with nervous apprehension. I had asked Arthur to simply introduce me as the head of the new parent company that had acquired them, a Mr. Bishop, who would be overseeing operations from a strategic level. He made the introduction, shook my hand, gave his former employees a sad, grateful smile, and walked out the door into his new life of retirement. The air was thick with uncertainty. They thought I was a corporate shark, there to downsize and slash costs. I let them sit with that for a moment before I spoke. "Good morning," I began, my voice calm and reassuring. "My name is Bishop. First, let me be clear. No one's job is in jeopardy. In fact, I'm looking to invest in this company, not strip it for parts. I believe there is significant potential here, and you are all a part of that." I could see the tension visibly release from their shoulders. I spent the next hour outlining a vision not of cuts, but of growth. New software, better benefits, more support. I was turning them from adversaries into allies. Then I got to the heart of the matter. I turned to one of the account managers, a young woman in her late 20s named Jessica, whose nameplate I'd seen on my way in. "Jessica," I said, "your portfolio includes the Oak Creek Meadows HOA, correct?" She flinched, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sir, it does." "Tell me about them." Jessica looked down at her hands. "They're challenging, sir. The president, Mrs. Henderson, she calls frequently. She can be very demanding." The euphemisms were telling. She was terrified of Karen. "I understand," I said, my tone shifting from corporate leader to field commander. "And I am going to give you a new specific protocol for handling all communications from Mrs. Henderson, effective immediately. This is the most important part of your job right now. Are you clear?" Jessica sat up straighter. "Yes, sir. From this moment on, when Karen Henderson calls, you will be polite, you will be professional, and you will activate the recording feature on our new phone system for the entire duration of the call. I want every word she says documented. You will not argue with her. You will not push back. You will not offer opinions. You will simply listen, take down her complaint in meticulous detail, and at the end of the call, you will say these exact words: 'I understand your frustration, Mrs. Henderson. I will pass this information along to the highest levels of management for immediate review.' That's it. Is that understood?" Jessica nodded, a flicker of something, confusion, maybe even hope, in her eyes. "Yes, sir. Record everything, be polite, and escalate to management." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I am management, and I will be reviewing every single one." The trap was now set. I had installed a state-of-the-art call recording and transcription service, ostensibly for quality control and training purposes. In reality, it was a surveillance net designed to catch one very specific fish. While this was happening behind the scenes back in Oak Creek Meadows, my deliberate silence was having its intended effect on Karen. The daily fines continued to arrive, but my formal, legalistic responses had stopped. I was no longer engaging. From her perspective, I had gone quiet. She interpreted this not as a strategic withdrawal, but as a surrender. She thought she had broken me. Her confidence swelled to dangerous new proportions. She became even more brazen, striding around the neighborhood with an air of triumphant authority. She left a new notice on my door, this one printed in a large angry red font, stating that my unpaid fines now totaled over $1,000 and that the HOA was exploring all legal remedies up to and including the placement of a lien on my property. She was practically giddy with her perceived victory. She believed she had me on the ropes, and all that was left was to deliver the knockout blow. And she knew just who to call to deliver it. She just had no idea who would be listening when she did. The moment arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a little after 2 o'clock. I was in my home office, which I had designated as my unofficial command center, reviewing the anemic financial statements from another one of Prestige's HOA clients. My dedicated work phone, a burner I used for all MB Capital business, buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica. The message contained only 5 words, Karen Henderson on line 1. My heart didn't race. Instead, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The same feeling I used to get in the moments before a major operation was set to launch. Everything was in place. The pieces were all on the board. I texted back a single word. Proceed. On my laptop, I logged into the secure portal for the new phone system. With a click of my mouse, I was patched into the call, my microphone muted. I was a ghost in the machine, an invisible witness. The first thing I heard was Karen's voice, pitched at a register of pure weaponized impatience. And I have been holding for 2 minutes. This is completely unacceptable. I am the president of the Oak Creek Meadows HOA, and I expect a certain level of service. Jessica's voice, by contrast, was a model of professional calm. I do apologize for the wait, Mrs. Henderson. How can I help you today? How can you help me? Karen squawked, her voice dripping with disbelief. I'll tell you how you can help me by doing your job. I have been sending violation notices to the property at 112 Willow Lane, the residence of a Mr. Mark Bishop, for almost a month now. The fines are over $1,000, and he is refusing to pay. He is refusing to remove the illegal flagpole structure. He is refusing to comply. What are you people doing about it? I see here in the system that you have been in regular communication regarding this issue, Mrs. Henderson, Jessica said, her tone perfectly neutral. The file is quite extensive. Extensive? Of course it's extensive. I've been doing your job for you. Now it's time for you to act. I want you to initiate legal proceedings against this man. I want you to place a lien on his property today. I leaned forward, my fingers steepled. This was it, the critical moment. Jessica, following my script to the letter, replied, Placing a lien is a significant legal step, Mrs. Henderson. Our process requires substantial documentation and review by our legal team to ensure. Karen cut her off with a sound that was half gasp, half snarl. Legal team? What is there to review? I am the president of the board. I am directing you to do it. This man, this Colonel Bishop, he thinks he's above the rules. He's arrogant. He publicly flaunts his defiance. He tried to have me believe a federal law protected him. Can you imagine the audacity? He needs to be made an example of. If we let one person get away with this, the whole community will descend into chaos. It's my duty to prevent that. Jessica's reply was flawless. I understand your position, Mrs. Henderson. No, I don't think you do, Karen shot back, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial, venomous tone. This isn't just about a flagpole anymore. This is about insubordination. He disrespected me. He disrespected the board. He disrespected this entire community. I want him to feel the full weight of the HOA. I want him buried in legal fees. I want that lien to cloud his title so he can't even think about selling his house without coming crawling to me first. I want you to use any means necessary to force his compliance. That's what we pay you for, isn't it? To be our enforcers? So, enforce? Every word was a golden nail in her own coffin. She wasn't just requesting a service, she was admitting to a personal vendetta. She was directing my company to engage in a campaign of harassment against me for the explicit purpose of making an example of me and satisfying her own ego. The recording software was capturing it all, a perfect, undeniable record of her malice and abuse of power. He even had the nerve to challenge a tow order I placed on his dilapidated commercial truck, she continued, her voice rising again. My authority is being undermined at every turn, and your company is sitting on its hands. I want action, and I want it now. I want a letter from your lawyers on his doorstep by Monday morning. Is that clear? There was a short pause. I could picture Jessica taking a deep breath. Yes, Mrs. Henderson, that is perfectly clear. Then came the magic words, the phrase I had coached her to say, the beautiful, bureaucratic checkmate. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Henderson. I will pass this information along to the highest levels of management for immediate review. You do that, Karen huffed, and you tell them that if I don't see some real action soon, I'll be looking for a new management company that knows how to follow orders. With that, she slammed the phone down. The click was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was over. The trap had been sprung. The bait had been taken. And the beast was now on tape, confessing to everything. The counteroffensive was about to begin. My home office transformed from a command center into a war room. The target was no longer just Karen. It was the entire corrupt structure she had built around herself. My ammunition was no longer just legal precedent. It was her own words and now her own financials. As the owner of Prestige Property Management, I didn't just have access to her phone calls. I had access to every contract, every invoice, and every financial statement for the Oak Creek Meadows HOA. It was the ultimate skeleton key. I spread the documents across my large oak desk. The HOA's annual budget, the monthly expense reports, the bank statements. To the untrained eye, it was a boring sea of numbers. To me, a man who had audited billion-dollar defense budgets for waste and fraud, it was a treasure map. I immediately saw red flags. The landscaping line item was grotesquely inflated, nearly double what a community our size should be paying. The administrative supplies budget was a black hole of thousands of dollars with no itemized receipts. Special assessment for pool repair funds seemed to have vanished after being collected. This wasn't just mismanagement. It smelled like fraud. I made a call. David, it's Mark. I need you. David Chen was a former JAG officer I'd served with at Pendleton. After leaving the Navy, he'd become a forensic accountant and one of the most feared civil litigation attorneys in the state. He specialized in dismantling corrupt small businesses and, as he liked to put it, making bullies pay with interest. Mark, he said, his voice instantly alert. Don't tell me you finally decided to invade a small country. Something like that, I replied. But smaller and with more beige houses. How soon can you get to my office? David was at my house within 2 hours. I laid out the entire situation, the flagpole, the harassment, the acquisition of Prestige, the phone call recording, and now, the suspicious financials. I handed him the audio file and the stack of documents. He put on his headphones, listened to the recording of Karen's call, and a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. Oh, she's a work of art, Mark, he said, taking off the headphones. This isn't just harassment. This is tortious interference, attempted wrongful lien, and a clear breach of fiduciary duty. She's not just going to lose her little crown. She might be trading it for a jumpsuit. For the next 48 hours, David and I dissected the HOA's finances. It was worse than I thought. The landscaping company, Evergreen Solutions, was getting paid exorbitant fees for basic lawn mowing and pruning. A quick corporate search by David revealed that Evergreen Solutions was a registered LLC. The sole proprietor? A Mr. Gary Jensen. A quick social media search revealed Gary Jensen's profile picture, a happy family photo taken at a barbecue. Standing next to him with her arm around him was Karen's sister. Gary was her brother-in-law. She was funneling HOA dues directly into her family's pockets at inflated rates. The administrative supplies were a series of large round-numbered payments to office supply stores in the next county, far from her home. The pool repair funds had been moved into a separate reserve account that she alone had signature authority over, and from which there had been several large cash withdrawals. We had her. Cold. Now it was time to deploy the countermeasures. David drafted a series of legal documents with the precision of a master watchmaker. First, a blistering cease and desist letter addressed to Karen Henderson personally, detailing her campaign of harassment and warning of impending civil action if it did not stop immediately. Second, a formal notice to the entire HOA board of directors, Karen and her two cronies, informing them that, as per their management contract, Prestige Property Management was invoking its right to conduct a full independent forensic audit of all HOA finances for the past 3 years due to suspected irregularities. Third, and most importantly, a formal petition to call a special meeting of all homeowners. The bylaws stated that such a meeting could be called if 10% of the homeowners signed a petition. I took the petition and walked next door to the Millers. I explained what I had found without revealing my ownership of Prestige. I just told them I'd been doing some digging. Their fear of Karen was instantly replaced by a righteous anger. They signed immediately. Within a day, I had signatures from 20 other households, more than double what I needed. The community was a powder keg, and I was about to hand them the match. On Monday morning, a professional process server hired by David delivered the packets. One to Karen's front door, where she reportedly snatched it from his hands with a look of pure confusion. Another was delivered to the official address of the HOA, which was of course also Karen's house. The shockwave must have been seismic. She was being legally ordered to stop harassing me. She was being told her books were about to be opened, and she was being informed that she would have to face the entire community she had terrorized in a meeting that she could not control. Her carefully constructed kingdom of fear was about to come crashing down around her. The night of the special meeting, the air in the local elementary school gymnasium was thick with a palpable electric tension. Nearly every homeowner in Oak Creek Meadows was there, 150 strong. People who usually just gave a polite nod as they drove by were now clustered in small, murmuring groups, a sense of shared grievance uniting them. They had all received the notice for the meeting, with its stark, formal language about addressing homeowner concerns and a review of board conduct. The rumor mill had been working overtime. Everyone knew this was about Karen and the Colonel, but the full scope of the confrontation was still a mystery. Karen and her two board cronies, a frail-looking man named Arthur and a woman named Brenda, who mimicked Karen's every expression, were seated at a long folding table at the front of the room. Karen, dressed in a severe navy blue pantsuit that looked like a suit of armor, was attempting to project an aura of control, but a slight tremor in her hand as she shuffled papers betrayed her anxiety. She was out of her element. This wasn't her porch. This was a room full of people who were no longer afraid of her. She banged a small gavel. "This special meeting of the Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association will now come to order," she announced, her voice straining to sound authoritative. "The first item on our agenda is a reminder about recycling bin placement on collection days." I didn't let her get any further. I stood up from my seat in the third row. "Point of order, Madam President," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the cavernous room. Every head turned towards me. According to Article 3, Section 5 of the bylaws, the agenda for a special meeting is determined by the petitioners who called it. My neighbors and I called this meeting. We will set the agenda. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Karen's face darkened. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Bishop." "What's irregular?" I countered, walking slowly toward the front of the room. "Is an HOA president using community funds to enrich her own family. That's the first item on our agenda." Gasps erupted. David, sitting in the front row, slid a projector remote into my hand. I clicked it. On the large screen behind Karen's head, an image appeared. a scanned copy of a massively inflated invoice from Evergreen Solutions for seasonal planting services. Next to it, I projected the photo of her brother-in-law, Gary, with his arm around her sister. Karen spun around, saw the image, and her face went white. That's slander. That's a private company. It's a company you've paid over $60,000 to in the last year alone from our dues, Karen, I said, my voice cold as ice. For mowing lawns, I got 3 independent quotes. The market rate for that work is less than half that. The murmuring grew louder, angrier. People were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. I clicked the remote again. The next slide showed the HOA bank statement with cash withdrawals from the pool repair fund. And this, I continued, is the $20,000 we all paid in a special assessment for pool repairs last summer, repairs that never happened. Where did that money go, Karen? She was sputtering now, cornered and exposed. It's in a reserve account. It's all accounted for. This is an ambush. You have no right. I have every right, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the room into a hush. Just as I have the right to not be subjected to a campaign of personal harassment. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went blank. And that brings me to the final item on our agenda, your abuse of power. I took a small digital audio player from my pocket and connected it to the speakers. A few days ago, Mrs. Henderson made a phone call to our HOA management company, Prestige Property Management. She was quite passionate. I think you all deserve to hear what your president does on your behalf. I pressed play. The gymnasium was dead silent as Karen's own voice, shrill and venomous, filled the air. I want you to initiate legal proceedings against this man. I want you to place a lien on his property. He needs to be made an example of. I want him buried in legal fees. I want you to use any means necessary to force his compliance. With each recorded phrase, another wave of shock and disgust washed over the homeowners. Her 2 board members looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. They physically distanced themselves from her at the table. When the recording finished with her threat to find a new management company, the silence was deafening. Karen stood there, trembling with rage and humiliation, her face a grotesque mask of fury. "You can't do that!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That's an illegal recording. That was a private business call. I'll sue you. I'll sue Prestige Property Management for this." I let her threat hang in the air for a long, delicious moment. I walked right up to the table, looked her directly in the eye, and delivered the final, fatal blow. "You can certainly try, Karen," I said, my voice calm and devastatingly quiet. "But as the sole owner of Prestige Property Management, I'll be the one accepting the subpoena." The collective gasp of 150 people sucked the air out of the room. Karen's jaw dropped. Her mind, unable to process the sheer strategic impossibility of what I had just said, simply broke. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horror that went beyond defeat. It was the look of a tyrant who had just discovered the peasant she'd been torturing was actually the king in disguise. The room exploded into chaos. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing. The reign of Queen Karen was over. It had ended not with a whimper, but with a bang, broadcast over a gymnasium PA system for all her subjects to hear. The immediate aftermath of my revelation was pure pandemonium. Homeowners surged toward the table, demanding answers, their voices a chorus of betrayal and anger. Karen, utterly broken, simply collapsed into her chair, a vacant look on her face. Her 2 board cronies, Arthur and Brenda, frantically tried to distance themselves from the wreckage. "We didn't know," Arthur stammered to the crowd. "She handled all the finances. We just signed what she told us to sign." It was a weak defense, but it was enough to deflect the initial wave of fury away from them and focus it squarely on the deposed queen. Within 15 minutes, an impromptu motion was made from the floor by Mr. Miller, a vote of no confidence in Karen Henderson as HOA president. It passed with a thunderous, unanimous aye. A second motion followed immediately, removing her from the board entirely. That, too, passed without a single dissenter. In less than half an hour, her entire empire, built over years of intimidation and control, had been utterly and completely dismantled. The meeting concluded with the election of a new interim board, with a shell-shocked but resolute Mr. Miller elected as the new president. His first official act was to publicly thank me and to pledge the board's full cooperation with the forensic audit being conducted by my company, Prestige Property Management. The next morning, David Chen and a team of his sharpest accountants descended upon the HOA's records, now with the full blessing of the new board. What they uncovered was even more damning than our initial findings. The fraud was systematic. The embezzlement from the pool fund, the kickback scheme with her brother-in-law's landscaping company, a slush fund disguised as legal consultation fees. It totaled over $100,000 over 5 years. Armed with an airtight report, the new HOA board, with David representing them, presented the findings to the county's district attorney. Criminal charges were filed against Karen for felony embezzlement and fraud. Her brother-in-law was charged as a co-conspirator. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence, invoices, bank statements, and her own recorded words, Karen's lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She pled guilty to 2 counts of felony fraud. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution of $117,452 to the Oak Creek Meadows HOA, and perform 1,500 hours of community service. The conviction also meant she was barred for life from ever serving on a board or in any position of financial trust. She and her husband quietly put their house on the market and moved away a few months later, disappearing from the community she had once ruled with an iron fist. With the cancer removed, the community began to heal. The money she returned revitalized the HOA's finances. The pool was properly repaired. The landscaping contract was awarded to a reputable local company at a fair price. The CC&Rs were systematically reviewed by a committee of homeowners, and the most absurd restrictive rules, the ones about approved shrubbery and basketball hoops, were summarily thrown out. A new era of common sense and neighborly respect began to dawn. My role also changed. I had never intended to be a property management magnate, but I found I had a knack for it. I officially took over as CEO of Prestige Property Management. I hired more staff, including promoting a grateful and incredibly competent Jessica to Director of Client Relations. We implemented what I called the Homeowners Bill of Rights for all the communities we managed, a document that guaranteed financial transparency, fair enforcement, and open communication. We fired problematic clients, the other Karens Arthur Finch had warned me about, and built a new reputation as the most ethical and transparent management company in the region. Our business tripled within a year. The flagpole, the catalyst for the entire war, still stands in my front yard. The flag flies every day, a silent tribute to Sergeant Miller and a quiet symbol of a victory won. Sometimes on a quiet evening, I'll stand on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the flag ripple in the breeze, the metallic clink of the halyard against the pole no longer a sound of defiance, but a chime of peace. Sarah will come and stand beside me, wrapping her arm around my waist. "You know," she said one evening, "you're a terrible retiree. You couldn't even handle a quiet life for 6 months without staging a corporate takeover of the neighborhood." I smiled. "Some systems aren't meant to be retired from, Sarah. They're meant to be fixed." Mr. Miller, the new HOA president, will often wander over, not with a violation notice, but with a couple of cold beers. We'll stand there, just 2 neighbors watching the sunset paint the sky, talking about our kids and our lawns. The fear that once permeated Oak Creek Meadows is gone, replaced by the simple, profound quiet of a community at peace with itself. I learned a valuable lesson in all this. Power, especially petty power, thrives in the dark, fed by fear and apathy, but when you shine a bright enough light on it, when you dissect its systems and expose its weaknesses, it crumbles. Karen thought she was fighting a war over a flagpole with one stubborn homeowner. In reality, she had taken on a logistician who understood that the most effective way to win a war is to own the enemy's supply lines, their chain of command, and the very ground they stand on. And in the end, I did. I bought it all.